This is Criminal Behaviorology. I am your host for Criminal Behaviorology, Timothy Joseph. Oh, I have not done a broadcast for a while. I don't think we've done a broadcast this month. This would be our 11th broadcast, and the last one we did in July of 2018. It was on the elimination of women, elimination of battering of women by men. And I got the sense from the statistics, both on the Podomatic site and on Facebook, it was fairly popular. I hope to become more popular in the future, but based on the first 9 broadcasts, this was a fairly popular subject matter, which is good. And I hope to have another popular broadcast, but I had advertised back on that July broadcast there would be a part 2, there would be a follow-up, and I'm going to attempt to do that in this broadcast. I'm trying to generate interest in the field, as you know. And if it starts locally, that is A-OK with me. You can go ahead and get onto our Facebook page. You can go on our blogger site, Criminal Behaviorology. You can come on the Podomatic site. You can use email. You remember that? Old grandpa stuff. Oh, well, back in the old days, we used email. Had to walk 40 miles of snow barefoot. No, But it's Criminal Behaviorology at gmail.com. Just write in about any episode. I'd love to have some feedback from the audience. Tell me what you think. What questions do you have? What things do you agree with, if anything, or what do you disagree with? Perhaps we'll have go over some of the information on the next broadcast. I'd love to have a review of input from the audience. Maybe looking into other sites that I'm not as familiar with or have not done as much work in. I could have a Twitter account. What do I know about Twitter? I've seen it discussed in the news. That's about it. And but we have like I said, we have the blogger site, we have the Podomatic site, we have a Facebook page. We'll have other social media venues in the future that we can take advantage of, and I hope to hear from the audience about. So, let's get on with tonight's broadcast. Now, in that previous broadcast in July of 2018, I had covered a 1995 article from the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, Eliminating the Battering of Women by Men, Some Considerations for Behavior Analysis by David L. Myers, Myers, Edison Community College. That was in the winter 1995 JABA, Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis edition. And when I was giving that broadcast, there was a fly in the studio. I recall, there's no flies here today. It's a much calmer setting. But we covered a lot of areas in kind of a general fashion on behavior analysis and how it could be applied to that particular problem. Well, you know what? I came across another set of articles that I think is really worth mentioning. I probably won't go into as much detail, but I'll give you the information on them. And we may have a little surprise here toward the end of the broadcast. We'll see how it goes. But in 2005 now, in it's Behavior and Social Issues, 2005, there was an article by Catherine M. Bell and Amy E. Naugle, Naugle, Western Michigan University. This is Behavior and Social Issues, 2005. This is understanding stay, leave decisions in violent relationships, a behavior analytic approach. Understanding stay/leave decisions in violent relationships, a behavior analytic approach. And the abstract, it says, numerous theories have been developed to account for the various factors influencing victims' decisions to remain in or leave an abusive relationship. This is similar to the Myers article. Thus far, however, these theories have failed to adequately capture the complexity of stay/leave decision making and have had limited clinical and research utility. The purpose of the current paper is to provide a behaviorally based approach to understanding stay/leave decisions by expanding on Myers' 1995 behavioral conceptualization of partner violence. An illustration is given on how various basic and contemporary behavioral principles might be applied to stay/leave decisions, followed by a discussion of how this behavioral analysis may provide a means of incorporating the components of other stay/leave models into a more comprehensive, contextually based behavior analytic approach. Lastly, recommendations are provided for integrating this approach into future research, and suggestions are made regarding how this analysis might be used to improve future partner violence prevention and treatment programs. As a quick reminder from that Myers article, Eliminating the Battering of Women by Men, Considerations for Behavior Analysis, Myers wrote, based on a review of representative literature, history, and current research, indicate that battering by male partners is a major health problem for women. Use of physical aggression and verbal coercion can be described by three-term contingencies involving escape, avoidance, punishment, and positive reinforcement. These contingencies occur within societal practices, rules, and models that involve oppression of women and insubstantial consequences for men who batter. The difficulties in directly observing a couple's interactions and their aggressions have been a methodological barrier to the involvement of behavior analysis in treatment of and research on domestic violence. Three-term contingency was the antecedent behavior and consequences, covered ways that escape, punishment, and positive reinforcement play a role. Some of the other common interventions to reduce domestic violence, which the Bell and Ogle article also cover, and also, as was mentioned, the problem of direct observation. And I really advocated this because I think the issue of domestic violence is an important issue, and it can be covered within the bounds of behavior analysis, and I thought that was a good article for what we do here, criminal behaviorology, the application of behavior analysis to the field of criminology. And what they're referring to in the Bell and Ogle article was about the stay. Why would a victim stay or leave? What's the basis of the stay-leave decision? Well, that's a behavior. That may have an antecedent. And in this article, they write on the behavioral conceptualization of stay-leave decisions. Few articles have been published in social science journals that use strictly behavior analytic models to characterize physically violent relationships. Theorists who have taken a more behavioral approach to understanding the dynamics of intimate partner violence have tended to emphasize the importance of consequences and contextual factors when conceptualizing battering relationships. So they're referring to the contingencies, the consequences and the factors involved that we can see. But here they give a nod to Myers. One of the more rigorous theoretical attempts in applying behavioral principles to episodes of partner violence was conducted by Myers in 1995. Myers proposed a three-term contingency model to describe how physical violence may function to control the victim's behavior. The author suggested that a woman's assertive and refusal skills, as well as other independent seeking behaviors, for example, working outside the home, may be punished by her partner's use of verbal and physical aggression. Consequently, the woman may comply with her husband's future requests as a means of avoiding or escaping potential verbal and/or physical altercations. The woman's compliance following physical assault may also serve as a reinforcer for the husband's violent behavior, which may further strengthen the battering response. The batterer may also receive social praise and avoid ridicule from his peers as a result of physically assaulting his partner. The combination of these potential reinforcers may increase the likelihood that the batterer will act physically aggressive towards his partner in the future. Myers also argued that batterers may rarely come into contact with punishing consequences, in other words, legal ramifications, that may otherwise serve to reduce aggressive behavior. Myers theorized how cultural rules and beliefs function to initiate and maintain intimate violence. The author proposed that the media and peers model consequences of battering described above. These rules and models serve as a contingency specifying stimuli that work in conjunction with discriminative stimuli to trigger battering episodes. Well, that was a mouthful there. But what I do like about the article, and this is good for people that are familiar with principles in behavior analysis or otherwise, because they're on page 29. They've got a nice little table. And the table is about operant principles applied to stay-leave decisions. Now, just keep in mind, we speak about this is a very emotional subject matter. We speak about it in kind of a cold, clinical way. But for our purposes, this is a good examination, I think, because this is somewhat mysterious to family members, to the police, to the public at large. We hear this all the time. Why didn't she just leave? Or they see that sometimes they may leave the relationship, abusive relationship, and then come back. And there's all kinds of, colloquialisms or beliefs about it, false beliefs maybe that women love jerks, or that's simple explanations. What we might refer to in behavior analytic terminology as an explanatory fiction. It's just some kind of a observation and to explain the phenomenon without looking at the contingencies in the environment, or at least having a theory about what might be the reinforcer or what might be the punishing effect on a particular observed behavior. Now keep in mind, the observed behavior here we're talking about is someone staying or leaving a violent relationship. So operant principles applied to stay-leave decisions. This page on page 29 of the Bell and Noggle article, Understanding Stay-Leave Decisions in Violent Relationships. They list the behavioral principle and then an example. Behavioral principle number 1. The ever classic positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement. Example, a victim receives praise from friends and family for returning to the batterer. And maybe you didn't expect that. Well, what's positive reinforcement about abusive relationship? Well, for returning, so the stay decision, praise from friends and family for returning to the batterer. Negative reinforcement. Victim escapes physical abuse by calling police and leaving home. Negative reinforcement, and this is then the stay decision. Victim escapes physical abuse by calling police and leaving home. Punishment. Victim punished for leaving encounters barriers to finding alternate living arrangements. In other words, living limited low-income housing options, maybe the difficulties of living in a battered woman's shelter. All the things can be immediate punishing effects. And some of this you've already thought of and described it in different terms. I think it clarifies it with the behavior analytic term, but we'll see what your opinion of it is as we go on. Extinction. Victim continues to be abused even after she leaves relationship, and thus the leaving response is eventually extinguished. Victim continues to be abused even after leaves relationship, and so the benefits of it are no longer there, and you have an extinction procedure. Behavioral deficits. Victim lacks skills to find alternate living arrangements. Rule-governed behavior. Familiar with this one? The rule-governed behavior. Victim who believes, quote, if I just continue to work on the relationships, eventually my partner will change, unquote, may be more likely to remain in an abusive relationship. So they're like, oh, it's like I need to work on this relationship. That's the rule-governed behavior, so they continue. Choice and behavioral economics. Okay. Victim stays in violent relationship when current relationship offers more incentives. In other words, housing, social and emotional support, sexual intimacy, financial relationships than alternate relationships do. And I think I've heard this term before as what's called the golden handcuffs. In other words, you're in a bad situation, but there's something there that keeps you in that bad situation. It's kind of tantamount to, oh, you hate your job, but the benefits are really good and we need the good benefits, health care for your kids, whatever. So the victim choice and behavioral, I think this is an important one. Victim stays in violent relationship when current relationship offers more incentives. There's things there that are keeping them there despite the bad situation. It's not that they like the abuse, but there's other things there that are applied in a choice and behavioral economics model. Delay discounting. Delay discounting. Victim chooses immediate reinforcers associated with staying in current relationship. E.g., familiarity of current relationship, emotional attachment, possessions, and social support linked with relationships. Okay, rather than choosing more delayed reinforcers related to leaving relationships. In other words, violence-free relationships, financial and occupational independence. Very important behavioral principle for this problem. Delay discounting. The victim, remember that it's not the power of whether something's reinforcing has a lot to do with the immediacy of it. So the victim chooses immediate reinforcers associated with staying in current relationship. In other words, familiarity of current relationship, emotional attachment, possessions, social support linked with the relationship, rather than choosing more delayed reinforcers related to leaving the relationship, which would be to be free of abuse. Yes, that's a better thing. Yes, we'd agree that's a much better situation, but the reinforcement for leaving is delayed beyond the reinforcer for staying, which is then immediate. Now, as a little surprise here, I hope to ultimately, here on the Criminal Behaviorology podcast, we're going to have some interviews and we have some guests on here, making progress on that technologically through Skype or other means. It's on-the-job training, bit by bit, and I hoped we'd have an interview tonight, but with some other technical considerations and life gets in the way. But ultimately, we're going to start having guests on here, one way or another. We'll have more than just flies buzzing around my studio, and we'll be able to have interviews with guests and go over things in greater detail. But I do have portions of a book and I think you'll enjoy it. And it relates to a little bit of what we have been talking about here in the broadcast so far. I'm going to read from the book Shattered Silence, an untold story of domestic violence. An untold story of domestic violence. The author is Brenna Hall. It's from 2014. Brenna, Brenna, Hall, Hall, 2014. Shattered Silence. And she gives a very vivid, really harrowing detail of violence in the home and efforts to escape it. And we talked about that earlier for the stay-leave decisions. And this is what she has on a section on domestic violence shelter experiences. So we're talking about before in the Hall and Ogle article and in Meyer's article, the reasons why for the stay-leave decision. And this is a vivid portrayal. I'm going to read this section. Though I thought the domestic violence situation in which we lived was terrible, living in a battered woman's shelter was a different kind of horror. At least living with my father, we still had some contact with relatives. During the 12-week sojourn in the shelter, we only had contact with my maternal grandmother by phone every third Thursday of the month for a 15-minute time period. Otherwise, there was no contact with other relatives or friends at all. Other new and frightening experiences for us were the daily group therapy sessions where we had to share our experiences with abuse with other battered women who were strangers to us. Since we were not in the shelter as long as others had been there, we did not share much. My mom did not wish to share her experiences since these people were strangers. The abuse would not be undone by talking about it, and she did not want to discuss things of which we were unaware in order to protect us. So in this particular description, the author and her mother had escaped an abusive relationship by the father, and they'd made their way into a shelter, and the shelter itself provided some difficult circumstances. So she goes on. However, the reasons my sister and I did not discuss it were a bit different. We too felt like outsiders, but we were also ridiculed for supposedly lying about the abuse during individual therapy sessions. The primary reason that my sister and I did not share stories about abuse was the fact that we had not processed the situation fully and could not adequately explain our experiences. Although we were safe in the shelter, some of the women there made the choices to contact their significant others to return to the situations in which they had lived beforehand. Remember the stay-leave decision. Not only did this choice endanger them, but it also put everyone else in danger. Some abusers will do anything to get back their abused partner. Once a woman's husband found out she was there after she had called him, and he came to the door with a rifle, threatening to shoot anyone who got in the way as he tried to get her. Fortunately, the counselor on duty wasted no time contacting the police, who arrested him quickly. The woman left the shelter the day after the incident occurred. The staff there made it clear that it was her choice if she wished to return to that situation. But she was not going to remain there to endanger other women and children's lives. This is an aspect of it that of the other people in the same situation that you may encounter regarding the stay-leave decision. So she goes on, although living in the shelter was meant to protect us and get us out of the violent situation, we felt more isolated here than we had living with my father. Each day we had routines that did not change. We attended therapy sessions daily except on the weekends. During the week, we tutored in the school room at the shelter. The highlight of getting tutored was we had no homework. All schoolwork was done in the classroom since they had one set of textbooks to use. At the time we were there, my sister and I were the oldest kids, so we were the only ones in school. All the other kids were not old enough to go to school. The highlight of the weeks was that we were going to local elementary school playground to play for an hour, and going to the YMCA every Thursday to play in the gym or the pool. One frightening memory of the trips to the YMCA was when one of the counselors tried to teach me to swim in the deep end of the pool. I went underwater since I was not very tall, and I was scared enough that I did not get into the pool again. The one bright spot in the domestic violence shelter stay was one of the women there had a new baby. After we had been there a few weeks, we got to know her a bit better, and we would go visit her mom and would chat while the baby slept and my sister and I played. Once the baby was awake, her mom asked me if I wanted to hold the baby for a while. Of course, I eagerly accepted the offer, though I was a bit afraid I would drop her. When her mom put the baby, in my arms, I sat as still as a statue for the short time she was in my arms. This experience solidified my wish to work with little kids in a medical setting. She was so content laying in my arms that the fear was replaced with shock that such a new baby was so well behaved that her mother trusted me, a 10-year-old child, to hold her and to not hurt her. So we can see toward the ending of that section, and she goes on about life after the shelter. But it wasn't all bad, and I don't mean this to be a description of all shelters for battered women. This is one person's experience, and so you may some of you out there may have had some of your own experiences with it. It's just an example of the consequences. And when I say consequences, it's from a very much a behaviorist perspective. You make a decision, and what are the consequences, and how does that affect the subsequent behavior? It may seem very simple from the outside when we see someone is in a violent situation that they ought to just get out of it. And if it were me, I say to myself, well, I would just leave. That's the best defense, and it often is to get away as far as you can. But there are other factors involved that influence our behavior. The timing of the consequences, the intensity of it, the potential reinforcement for staying even in a difficult situation, and the learning history of the person or the people involved. And I think this, from the book Shattered Silence, it gives a concise little description of one of the things that may be involved with punishment, with extinction, with delayed discounting, in part. So there you have it. It is a follow-up to our discussion on domestic violence. I found many interesting articles. We may cover them more here after a bit. A lot of stuff out there, not all of it recognizing the behavior analytic principles, but coming close to it, and I think it's worth reviewing in the future. So if you're up to it, send me some feedback. Facebook page, blogger, Podomatic, criminalbehaviorology, one word, at gmail.com. Tell us what you think. I'm your host, Timothy Joseph. Thank you so much.